I walked into the restaurant believing we were celebrating my master's degree. I even paid the $400 bill out of habit. But when my parents slid the contract across the linen tablecloth, I realized the celebration was actually an ambush. They demanded I sign away my future to fix my sister's mistakes. They expected my usual silence. Instead, I smiled and destroyed the financial safety net they thought they owned. My name is Margaret Holloway. At 32 years old, standing in the foyer of the Obsidian, I felt less like a graduate celebrating a monumental academic achievement and more like a utility that had momentarily served its purpose. I had just completed a grueling 2-year executive master's program in quantitative finance, balancing 40-hour work weeks with sleepless nights of statistical modeling. Yet, as the maitre d' guided us toward a reserved table overlooking the dark, churning water of the river, the only thing my mother seemed to focus on was the fact that my hair was pulled back in a bun rather than worn down. "It makes you look so severe. Margaret," she whispered, squeezing my arm with a smile that was designed for public consumption. "But tonight is a celebration. Try to relax." The restaurant was one of those places where the lighting was dim enough to hide imperfections and the menu prices were high enough to demand respect. It was the kind of establishment my parents loved to be seen in, even if they could rarely afford it comfortably without checking their bank balances first. My father, Robert, walked ahead of us, his posture stiff, guiding my younger sister, Jessica, with a protective hand on her back. We took our seats. The table was set with heavy silverware and starched white linens. From the outside, we looked like the picture-perfect American family celebrating the eldest daughter's success. But the air between us was thick, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "We are so proud of you, Maggie," my father said, unbuttoning his suit jacket as he sat down. He looked at me, but his eyes quickly darted to Jessica, who was staring intently at the bread basket. "A master's degree. That is really something." "Thanks, Dad," I said, placing my napkin in my lap. I had always been the independent one, the rock, the one who did not need phone calls, or check-ins, or financial safety nets. Since I moved out at 18, I had cultivated an identity of absolute self-sufficiency. It was a survival mechanism that my family had conveniently interpreted as me simply not needing love. Jessica, on the other hand, was 27 and still treated like a fragile sapling that might snap in a stiff breeze. She was currently unemployed, finding herself for the third time in 5 years, yet she was wearing a new designer dress that likely cost more than my car insurance for 6 months. Throughout the meal, I noticed the micro-expressions that a stranger would have missed. My mother kept tapping her fingers against the stem of her wine glass. My father was drinking his scotch faster than usual. Jessica refused to meet my eyes, offering only tight, nervous smiles when I asked about her apartment. "How is the landlord situation?" I asked, slicing into my steak. "Oh, it's fine," Jessica stammered, looking to Mom for help. "We are handling it." "She is handling it," Mom corrected, her voice sharp. "Let's not talk about problems tonight. Tonight is about the future." The way she said future carried a weight that made my stomach turn. When the meal concluded and the waiter placed the black leather billfolder in the center of the table, the silence was deafening. My father looked out the window at the city skyline. My mother busied herself with reapplying her lipstick in a compact mirror. Jessica studied the tablecloth as if it contained the secrets of the universe. It was a practiced routine, a habit solidified over a decade. Margaret has a good job. Margaret has savings. Margaret pays. I did not sigh. I did not roll my eyes. I simply reached out, took the folder, and slid my credit card inside. $540. It was a significant sum, but I paid it without a word, just as I always did. I expected the transaction to signal the end of the evening, the part where we stood up, hugged awkwardly, and went our separate ways. But no one moved. The waiter returned, processed the card, and placed the receipt in front of me. I signed it. Still, they remained seated. My father cleared his throat, a low, rumbling sound that usually preceded bad news. He exchanged a look with my mother, a look of grim determination, like soldiers agreeing to crest a hill. "Margaret," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, almost somber tone. "Before we go, there is something we need to talk about, a family matter." I capped my pen and looked at them. The warmth of the celebration had evaporated completely, replaced by a cold, calculating tension. I knew then that the dinner had never been about my graduation. It was just the price of admission for whatever was coming next. "You are so strong, Margaret." That phrase had been the soundtrack of my life, but it was never a compliment. It was a dismissal. In the Holloway household, strength was not a virtue to be celebrated. It was a convenient excuse to withhold affection. Being strong meant I did not need checking in on. It meant I did not need resources. It meant that while my parents poured their emotional and financial reserves into the bottomless pit of my sister's crises, I was expected to survive on photosynthesis and grit. I looked across the table at Jessica, who was nervously shredding a cocktail napkin. My parents treated her fragility like a precious heirloom that needed constant polishing. When Jessica dropped out of college after one semester because she was homesick, they bought her a car to make her feel better. When she quit 3 jobs in a single year because the managers were mean, they paid her rent for 12 months so she could find her passion. I remembered the phone call I received 3 years ago. I was 29, working 80-hour weeks to secure a promotion. "Maggie, it is your dad," the voice on the other end had said. "We are in a bit of a bind. Jessica's credit card debt. Well, the interest rates are criminal. We need about $15,000 to clear it so she can start fresh. We would ask the bank, but, I had sent the money. I always sent the money. I told myself it was for them, to ease their burden, but deep down I knew I was paying a tax for my own competence. I was buying my freedom from their drama. They took the check, thanked me with a quick text message, and never mentioned it again. To them, my bank account was just a natural extension of their own, a reservoir that refilled itself by magic. They did not understand how I earned that money. My work in quantitative financial analysis was not just about math, it was about behavior. I spent my days combing through massive data sets, looking for the tiny, jagged irregularities that signaled fraud, embezzlement, or impending corporate collapse. I was trained to see what people tried to hide. I knew that when a company suddenly changed its reporting structure, it was usually covering up a loss. I knew that when a CEO became overly sentimental in a shareholder meeting, he was usually about to sell off a division. I had spent a decade honing a finely tuned radar for manipulation and hidden agendas. It was ironic. Really. My parents bragged to their friends that I worked with numbers, but they had no idea that my actual profession was detecting lies. And tonight, the data points were screaming at me. It was the way my father had ordered the second most expensive bottle of wine without asking the price. It was the way my mother kept touching her necklace, a nervous tic she only displayed when she was lying. It was the oversized handbag sitting by her feet, large enough to hold legal-sized documents. They were following a script. I had seen this pattern in failing businesses 100 times: the lavish lunch before the merger was canceled, the forced smiles before the layoffs were announced. I brought my attention back to the present moment, dragging myself out of the memories of past slights and unpaid loans. The waiter materialized at our table, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over us. He held a large, rectangular platter with practiced grace. "The truffle arancini and the seafood tower, as requested," the waiter said, placing the dishes in the center of the table. The smell of fried sage and brine drifted up, masking the scent of expensive perfume and anxiety. My mother clasped her hands together, beaming with a brightness that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, wonderful," she said, her voice an octave too high. "Let's eat. We have so much to discuss." I looked at the appetizers. then at my parents. The trap was set. The bait was on the table. And they had no idea that the person sitting across from them made a living out of surviving worst-case scenarios. Robert cleared his throat again, this time with the theatrical resonance of a man preparing to deliver a sermon. He picked up his knife and tapped it against the crystal wine glass. The sharp ding, ding, ding cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant, causing heads at nearby tables to turn in our direction. "If I could just have a moment," my father announced, his voice booming slightly more than necessary for a table of 4. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a sense of gravity. "Tonight is about achievement. Yes, Margaret has earned a degree, and we are happy about that. But more importantly, tonight is about family. It is about securing the future for the next generation and ensuring that everyone has the foundation they need to thrive." My mother beamed up at him, her eyes glistening with an emotion that looked suspiciously rehearsed. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. The speech was pivoting. It was shifting away from my academic success and steering dangerously toward the family matter he had mentioned earlier. "Jessica," my father said, turning his entire body toward my sister, "we know you have had a rough couple of years. The world is a hard place. But your mother and I want you to know that we believe in you. We believe in your potential to build a life." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was not a greeting card. It was the size of legal documents. "This is for you, sweetheart," he said, placing it on the tablecloth in front of her. A fresh start. A permanent home. Jessica's eyes went wide. She looked from the envelope to our parents and back again, her breath hitching. "Daddy!" "What is this?" "Open it," my mother urged, her voice trembling with excitement. Jessica tore open the seal with clumsy, shaking fingers. She pulled out a stack of stapled papers. I watched her scan the first page, her mouth falling open. The condo on 4th Street," she gasped. "You are giving me the condo." "It is all yours," my father declared, spreading his arms wide. "No more rent, no more landlords, a property of your own, free and clear." Jessica squealed, a high-pitched sound of pure delight, and launched herself out of her chair to hug my father. "Oh my God, thank you, I don't know what to say." The commotion drew the attention of the entire room. Waiters paused with trays in hand. A couple at the table next to us smiled and clapped politely, assuming they were witnessing a heartwarming birthday surprise or a generous graduation gift. The applause rippled slightly, a few other diners joining in the celebration of what looked like paternal love, but I was not clapping. My eyes were locked on the documents scattered on the table where Jessica had dropped them. The cover page had slid to the side, revealing the legal description of the property on the second sheet. I knew that font. I knew that address. And more importantly, I knew the specific clause number listed at the top of the paragraph. Unit 4B, the Riverside Lofts. My blood ran cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in a second. That condominium was not my parents' property to give. Technically, my father's name was on the deed, but 3 years ago, when his business took a hit, he had leveraged that property to the hilt. He had faced foreclosure until I stepped in. I leaned forward, my vision sharpening on the bottom of the visible page. There, typed in standard legal block letters, was a requirement for a secondary signature to release the lien, a lien that was held by me. The document was not just a transfer of ownership, it was a deed of release. I looked up. My father was hugging Jessica, patting her hair, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch to perfection. But as he pulled away, his eyes flickered toward me. For a split second, the mask slipped. He did not look like a proud father. He looked like a gambler waiting to see if his bluff had worked. He quickly looked away, focusing intently on his Scotch glass. My mother refused to look at me at all, busying herself with refilling Jessica's water glass, her movements jerky and fast. The applause from the other tables died down, leaving a silence at our table that was heavy enough to crush bone. The smile on my face had not changed, but the muscles in my jaw were tight. That is incredibly generous," I said, my voice steady, though it lacked any warmth. Jessica sat back down, clutching the papers to her chest like a winning lottery ticket. "I can't believe it. I mean, I can finally set up my art studio in the second bedroom." "It is a beautiful apartment," I added, my eyes drilling into my father. "But I think there is some paperwork missing, isn't there?" "Dad?" My father cleared his throat loudly. "It is just standard procedure. Margaret, just family helping family." The air around the table curdled. The joy was still on Jessica's face, but she was starting to sense the shift. She looked at me, then at Dad, her smile faltering. The waiter arrived to pour the wine, but he hesitated, sensing the sudden, sharp tension that radiated from us like heat from a fire. This was no longer a celebration. It was a hostage negotiation. My eyes scanned the document upside down. It was a skill I had picked up during high-stakes boardroom negotiations where glancing at an opponent's notes could save a merger. The header read, "Transfer of title," but the fine print told a different story. It was a conditional transfer, predicated on the removal of all existing encumbrances. Specifically, my encumbrance. 3 years ago, I had loaned my parents $85,000 to stop the bank from seizing that very unit. I had been smart enough to file a lien against the property, ensuring that if they ever sold it, I would be paid back first. It was a safety measure, a cold calculation made by a daughter who knew her parents were bad with money. Now, staring at the papers, I saw the trap. They were not just giving Jessica a home. They were asking me to voluntarily dissolve that debt. They were asking me to take $85,000 of my hard-earned savings and set it on fire. I looked at the amortization schedule attached to the back. The property taxes alone were $6,000 a year. The homeowners association fees were another $500 a month. Jessica had zero income. Who did they think was going to pay that? The structure of the deal was a classic toxic asset. They were dumping a liability onto an insolvent entity, my sister, and asking the creditor me to forgive the principal. My father leaned in, his elbows resting heavily on the table. The jovial mask was gone, replaced by the look of a man trying to close a desperate deal. "Margaret," he said, his voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper he used when he wanted to make me feel special. "Obviously, we cannot transfer the deed to Jessica with the lien still active. The bank won't allow it. We need a clean title." "So," my mother interjected, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her skin was cold. "We need you to sign the release. It is just a formality, really. You know we would pay you back eventually. But right now, Jessica needs this security. She needs a win." "A win," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You are doing so well, Maggie," my mother continued, her eyes wide and pleading. "You have your new degree. You have that big salary. You don't need that money tied up in the condo. Jessica has nothing. Think of it as your graduation gift to the family." My stomach tightened. There it was, the proposal. They were framing financial suicide as an act of love. They wanted me to subsidize my sister's lifestyle by erasing my own assets, and they had staged this entire public dinner to ensure I would be too embarrassed to say no. They were banking on my conditioning. They were betting on the obedient daughter who always picked up the check. I looked at Jessica. She was still beaming, completely oblivious to the fact that the gift she had just received was actually an anchor that required my money to stay afloat. She didn't even know about the lien. She probably thought our parents owned it outright. "You want me to forgive an $85,000 loan," I stated, my voice flat. "And you want me to do it right now. Over dessert." "Don't say it like that," my father snapped. a flash of irritation breaking through. "It is not a loan anymore. It is an investment in your sister's future. We are a family. Margaret, we make sacrifices for each other." I did not answer immediately. In my line of work, silence is a weapon. When you stay silent, the other party usually starts talking to fill the void, revealing things they meant to keep hidden. I picked up my wine glass, swirled the dark red liquid, and watched them sweat. I could see the pulse jumping in my father's neck. They thought they had cornered me, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. They were playing checkers with emotion, while I had been playing three-dimensional chess with risk assessment for a decade. "It is just a signature, Margaret," my father said, pushing the black fountain pen toward me across the white tablecloth. "Don't make this complicated." He spoke with the casual authority of a man who had never been told no, at least not by his children. The pen rolled slightly and came to a stop next to my untouched wine glass. "Complicated?" I asked, my voice barely rising above a whisper. "You are asking me to gift my sister $85,000. That is not a small favor, Dad. That is a year of salary for most people." "But you are not most people," my mother interjected, leaning in so close that I could smell the Chardonnay on her breath. You are established. You have your fancy degree now. You are going to be making so much money that this amount will seem like nothing to you. Jessica needs this. She needs a foundation." "I am barely 32, I replied, looking directly at her. "I am not a bank." "Nobody said you were a bank," Jessica snapped, her voice cracking. "God, why do you always have to be so selfish? Mom and Dad are trying to do something nice for me, and you are ruining it with your math." "It is not my math, Jessica," I said calmly. "It is the law." The couple at the adjacent table had stopped pretending to ignore us. I could feel their eyes boring into the side of my head, witnessing the quintessential American family breakdown. My parents were counting on this. They were weaponizing the social contract of the high-end restaurant, assuming that I would sign the paper simply to avoid the shame of a public argument. They believed that my desire for order was stronger than my desire for self-preservation. It was a tactic they had used since I was 16. Margaret will fix it. Margaret will pay. Margaret won't complain because Margaret hates conflict. But they had miscalculated. I did hate conflict, but I hated being robbed even more. I looked at the document again. The deed of release was drafted to strip me of my security interest in the property. Once I signed it, the condo would belong fully to my father again, who would then ostensibly transfer it to Jessica. But without my lien, there was nothing stopping him from taking out a new loan against it first, or selling it, or letting Jessica run it into the ground. "You said this was a gift," I said, looking at my father. "If you want to give her the condo, you can transfer the title subject to my lien. Why does my debt have to be erased for her to live there?" My father stiffened. He adjusted his tie, looking anywhere but at me. Because she deserves a fresh start. Margaret, a clean slate." He blustered, his face flushing red. "How can she feel secure if she owes her big sister money? It creates a bad dynamic." "A bad dynamic," I repeated. "You mean like inviting me to a dinner to celebrate my hard work, only to hand me a bill for my sister's lifestyle? That is not fair," my mother hissed, her eyes narrowing. "We paid for your dinner." "I paid for the dinner," I corrected her, gesturing to the receipt that was still sitting near my elbow. "I just paid $540 for the privilege of being extorted." Jessica let out a dramatic sob, covering her face with her hands. "I knew it. I knew she would do this. She hates that I am getting something nice. She wants me to fail. I don't want you to fail, Jessica," I said, keeping my voice terrifyingly even. "I want to know how you plan to pay the taxes." The table went silent. Jessica lowered her hands, blinking wet lashes. "What? The property taxes," I continued, leaning forward. "They are due in October. $6,000. $200, and the association fees are $500 a month. That is $12,000 a year just to keep the lights on and the door unlocked. You don't have a job. So, who is paying that? I shifted my gaze to my parents. They looked like deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck. Well, I pushed, my voice sharp as a scalpel. Is that part of the gift? Dad? Or are you planning to ask me to pay that too in 6 months when the foreclosure notice comes in the mail? We will figure it out, my father stammered, his bluster deflating rapidly. No, I said, picking up the pen. I held it for a second, watching hope flare in their eyes, before I set it down firmly on the opposite side of my plate. Far out of reach. We won't. Let us be clear about the mechanics of this transaction, I said, flipping the document over to the signature page with a deliberate slowness that made my father twitch. You cannot transfer a title that has a lien on it unless the new owner assumes the debt or the debt is satisfied. Jessica has no income, so she cannot assume the debt. You have no cash, so you cannot satisfy it. So, how exactly is this transfer happening? My father wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip. The bank is being very flexible. They understand that the family assets are strong. Which bank? I asked, my eyes locking onto his. It is a private lender, my mother interjected quickly, her voice breathless. A friend of your father's. He understands our situation. A friend? I repeated. Does this friend know that the $85,000 of equity you are trying to gift wrap for Jessica actually belongs to me? It is all the same pot, my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the silverware jump. My money! Your money! It is all Holloway money. Why do you have to be so difficult? I ignored his outburst, my analyst brain latching onto a discrepancy I had missed in the first pass. I focused on the bottom of the second page. There was a faint, gray stamp near the margin, something that looked like a fax header or a digital watermark. I squinted. It was a date stamp from yesterday, and next to it was a file reference number. But it was not just a random string of digits. It started with MHXT 2024. My heart stopped for a beat, then restarted with a cold, rhythmic thud. MH, Margaret Holloway. EXT, External Verification. That was the specific alphanumeric code my own firm used when verifying income for high net worth employees applying for external credit. Where did you get this document? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I told you, the lender prepared it, my father said, looking away toward the bar. No, I said, pointing to the stamp with a manicured nail. This code. This is from my company's HR portal. This is an income verification stamp. The only way to generate this code is to log into my employee account with a 2-factor authentication token. I looked up at them. My mother was studying her fingernails with intense fascination. My father was draining his scotch as if it were water. You logged into my laptop, I said. It was not a question. When I was home for Christmas, you asked to borrow it to check your email because your phone died. You didn't check your email. You downloaded my financial profile. We just needed to show them you were supportive, my mother murmured, her voice trembling. They wouldn't approve the refinancing without a strong co-signer. We knew you would say yes eventually, so we just sped up the process. Sped up the process? I asked, feeling the icy calm of professional detachment wash over me. You committed identity theft. You used my credentials to apply for a loan in my name against a property I already hold a lien on, so you could cash out the equity and give it to Jessica. It is not theft if it is family, Jessica cried out, though she looked confused, her eyes darting between our parents. They said you were helping me. They said you wanted to do this. They lied to you, I said, not looking at her. I sat back in my chair. The puzzle was complete. This wasn't just about guilt-tripping me into forgiving a debt. This was a rescue operation for their own fraud. They had likely already signed the preliminary papers. If I didn't sign this release, the new loan would fall through, and the bank or this private lender would start asking questions about the fraudulent income verification. They weren't asking for a favor. They were asking for an accomplice. I reached into my purse. "What are you doing?" my father asked, his voice rising in panic. "Margaret, put that away. We are eating dinner." "I am done eating," I said. I pulled out my phone and unlocked it. The screen glowed bright in the dim restaurant. I navigated to my contacts list. "Margaret, don't!" my mother pleaded, reaching across the table again to grab my wrist. Her grip was desperate. "Please, just talk to us. We can fix this." "I am fixing it," I said, pulling my arm away. I tapped the contact labeled Legal Compliance, Corporate. The silence that descended on the table was heavier than the linen, heavier than the debt, heavier than the years of neglect. It was the absolute, terrified silence of people watching a bomb timer reach zero. The phone rang once, twice. The sound was a low, digital trill in the silent vacuum of our table, but to me, it sounded like the tolling of a bell. My father stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor, knocking over an empty wine glass. It shattered, sending shards of crystal skittering across the floor, but he did not even look down. "Margaret, put the phone down," he ordered, his voice pitching up into a desperate command. "You do not know what you are doing. You are going to blow this whole thing out of proportion. Operations," a crisp, male voice answered on the other end of the line. "Please state your employee ID and emergency code." I held my hand up, palm out, signaling my father to stop moving. He froze, his face a mask of red-flushed panic. My mother was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "This is Senior Analyst Margaret Holloway," I said into the receiver, my voice steady, devoid of any tremor. "ID number 492 Alpha 7. I am calling to report an immediate security breach involving my internal credentials and unauthorized external credit inquiries." "Margaret!" my mother shrieked, a sound that made the diners 3 tables away gasp. "Stop it. It was for your sister. It was for family." "We have identified the user," the voice on the phone responded, instantly shifting into crisis mode. "Please confirm the nature of the breach." "Identity theft and wire fraud," I replied, staring directly into my father's eyes as the color drained from his face. My personal data was accessed from a non-secure location to falsify a loan application. I need you to initiate a code red freeze on all my accounts, internal and external. Flag any recent applications as fraudulent, specifically those originating from the New Haven area within the last 48 hours. Jessica dropped her fork. It clattered against her porcelain plate with a harsh chime. She looked at our parents, then at me, her confusion morphing into a dawning, horrific realization. "Fraud," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Daddy, what is she talking about?" "You said the bank approved it. You said it was all legal." "It is a misunderstanding," my father stammered, looking around the room as if seeking an exit. "Your sister she is overreacting. She is trying to hurt us. I am currently in possession of a coercion document labeled as a deed of release," I continued to the security officer, ignoring my father's lies. "I am being pressured to sign it to facilitate this fraudulent transaction. I am not signing. I am reporting this as an active attempt to defraud a financial institution." "Understood, Ms. Holloway," the officer said. "We are locking the profile now. The credit bureaus are being notified electronically as we speak. Any pending applications will be automatically rejected with a fraud alert code. Do you need law enforcement assistance at your current location?" I paused. I looked at the man who had raised me, the man who was currently sweating through his expensive suit, realizing that his house of cards had not just fallen, but had been incinerated. I looked at my mother, who was weeping silently. Not for the crime, but for the consequences. Not at this moment, I said coldly, but I will be filing the formal affidavit with the compliance department by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you. I ended the call and placed the phone gently back on the table, face down. The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension. This was the silence of a crash site. The energy in the room had shifted from a private family dispute to a public spectacle. The couple at the next table was openly staring, their meal forgotten. The waiter who had been approaching with the dessert menu stopped 10 feet away, sensing the radiation of disaster, and wisely turned back. "You!" my father breathed, sinking back into his chair as if his legs had given out. You just flagged me for fraud. Do you know what that does? Do you have any idea what you just did to my credit rating, to my reputation?" "I protected my own," I answered, picking up my napkin and placing it on the table. "You used my name. You used my license. If that loan had gone through and you defaulted, which you would have, because you cannot afford the taxes on that condo, I would have lost my license. I would have been blacklisted from the finance industry for being party to a fraudulent application. You didn't just try to steal my money. Dad, you tried to kill my career." Jessica picked up the envelope, the gift, and looked at it as if it were radioactive. "So?" Jessica's voice was small, broken. "So the condo isn't mine. The studio, the fresh start, none of it is real." "It was never real, Jessica," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, though I refused to lie to her. "It was a bribe paid for with stolen credit." My mother looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. She looked old. Suddenly, the facade of the happy, wealthy matriarch had dissolved, leaving behind a desperate woman who had gambled everything on her eldest daughter's submission and lost. "We are your parents," she whispered, the words sounding hollow. "How could you do this to us?" "I didn't do this to you," I said, standing up and smoothing the skirt of my dress. "You did this to yourselves when you decided I was a resource instead of a daughter." The mechanism was in motion now. The banks would call within the hour. The accounts would be locked. The reality of their financial ruin, which they had tried to patch over with my credit score, was about to hit them with the force of a freight train. And for the first time in my life, I was not going to be there to pull them off the tracks. "You have spent 30 years building a myth that we are a perfect family," I said, my voice cutting through the trembling silence of the dining room. "But the foundation of this family isn't love. It is my bank account." My father's face was a mottled map of rage and humiliation. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white against the dark wood. "How dare you?" he hissed, the volume low but the intensity scorching. "After everything we did for you, we put clothes on your back, we sent you to the best schools, and this is how you repay us by treating your own parents like common criminals." "Criminals don't usually claim to love their victims while they are robbing them," I countered. "But yes, you are right. You sent me to school, and I paid back every cent of those student loans myself, because the college fund you promised me mysteriously vanished the year Dad's first business went under. I never asked where it went. I just worked 2 jobs. We did what we had to do to survive," my mother cried out, clutching her napkin to her chest. "We are a family. Margaret, we share the burden. Your sister needed help, and you have so much. Why is it so hard for you to share? You have become so cold, so heartless." "I am not heartless," I said, staring at her until she looked away. "I am exhausted. I am tired of being the insurance policy you cash out whenever you make a bad decision." "I am not a bad decision," Jessica yelled, finding her voice. She stood up, knocking her chair back. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were wild with confusion and hurt. "I just wanted a place of my own. I thought you wanted that for me too." I turned to my sister. For the first time all night, my expression softened. She was spoiled, yes, and entitled, but she was also a victim of their enabling. They had crippled her independence to make themselves feel needed, and then used her neediness to manipulate me. I do want you to have a home, Jess, I told her honestly. But this condo isn't a home. It is a crime scene. Mom and Dad didn't buy it for you. They own it. But they are drowning in debt. They needed to refinance it to pay off other loans, but their credit is shot. So they used my name to get the money. If I signed that paper, I wouldn't be giving you a house. I would be co-signing a loan that I would eventually have to pay off when they defaulted again. Jessica froze. She looked down at the parents who had pampered her for 27 years. Is that true? She asked, her voice barely audible. Did you lie to me? We were protecting you. My father shouted, slamming his hand on the table again, though the gesture lacked its earlier power. We were trying to secure your future. Margaret is twisting everything to make herself look like the victim. She has always been jealous of you, Jessica. Always. That was the breaking point. The final thread of the dutiful daughter snapped. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that seemed to startle them more than my anger had. Jealous, I repeated, shaking my head. You think I am jealous of a 27-year-old woman who cannot pay her own phone bill, no dad. I am not jealous. I am done. I picked up my clutch and stepped away from the table. The physical distance felt like a chasm opening up between my past and my future. The other diners were watching us openly now, but I no longer cared about public appearances. That was their currency, not mine. Here is the reality, I said, addressing my parents with the cool precision of a judge delivering a sentence. The fraud alert is active. You cannot refinance the condo. You cannot open new lines of credit in my name. The bank will likely call the note on the property within 30 days once they realize the application was falsified. You are ruining us, my mother sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I am stopping you, I corrected her. You have two choices. You can sell the condo, pay off the existing mortgage, and use whatever equity is left to help Jessica actually start over. Or you can try to fight the fraud claim. If you do that, I will hand over the IP logs from my laptop and the timestamps of the unauthorized access to the police. I will press charges for identity theft. My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at me and saw that the daughter he thought he could bully into submission had been replaced by a stranger who knew exactly how much he was worth. You have 48 hours to decide, I said. Do not call me unless it is to tell me the house is on the market. I turned to Jessica, who was still standing amidst the ruin of the dinner, holding the worthless deed. I am sorry, Jess, I said, but it is time to grow up. I turned my back on them. I did not wait for a response. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said by the silence of the empty bank accounts and the lies they had told to fill them. The bridge was not just burned. I had detonated the pillars. My father's phone vibrated against the mahogany table, a harsh, buzzing intrusion that made everyone flinch. He looked down at the screen, and the last remnants of color drained from his face. It was an automated text message from his bank. I knew exactly what it said because I had designed the trigger protocols for similar systems myself. It would be alerting him that his primary accounts were frozen pending a fraud investigation. They locked it, he stammered, staring at the device as if it were a bomb. Access denied. They actually locked the accounts. I told you I was not bluffing, I said, looking down at him. The shift in the room was palpable. For 30 years, Robert Holloway had been the sun around which our family orbited, a gravitational force of authority and financial control. But in that single moment, the orbit collapsed. He was no longer the patriarch. He was a liability. The power had not just shifted, it had been violently seized. My mother looked at him, then at me, her eyes darting with the desperate calculation of a survivor on a sinking ship. She realized too late that she had bet on the wrong horse. She had spent the evening and, indeed, her life coddling Jessica and pacifying Robert, assuming I would always be the silent, sturdy pillar holding up the roof. Now that I had stepped away, the roof was coming down, and she was terrified of the debris. "Margaret, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "If the accounts are frozen, we can't pay the mortgage on the main house. We can't pay the club fees. This will humiliate us." "You should have thought about that before you committed a federal crime to fund a lifestyle you can't afford," I replied, my voice devoid of sympathy. "The humiliation is a choice you made when you decided my financial identity was yours to use." Jessica made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She looked at the deed in her hand, then crumpled it into a ball and threw it onto the table. It rolled and stopped against the base of the centerpiece candle. "So that is it?" Jessica asked, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "I am just—" "On the street, I gave up my apartment lease. Margaret, I told my landlord I was moving out at the end of the month because Dad said the condo was mine. Where am I supposed to go?" "You are 27, Jessica," I said. "You have a degree in art history that you haven't used. You have 2 hands and a brain. I suggest you get a job. Or perhaps you can stay with Mom and Dad, although I imagine their guest room is going to feel a lot smaller when the foreclosure notices start arriving." "You can't leave her like this," my mother cried out, reaching for my hand again. But I stepped back out of reach. "She is your sister. She is family." "Family doesn't steal from family," I said. "And family doesn't ambush you at a graduation dinner to force you into bankruptcy." The illusion of the perfect family had shattered completely. The diners around us were no longer pretending not to listen. They were witnessing the raw, ugly autopsy of our relationship. The waiter stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, clutching a water pitcher, unsure if he should approach or call security. My father looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. He realized that the daughter he had dismissed as merely strong was actually dangerous. He had mistaken my silence for submission, and that mistake had just cost him everything. "You are cold," he spat out, the words wet with venom. "You are ice cold." "I learned from the best," I retorted. I looked at the 3 of them one last time. My father, defeated and shrinking in his suit. My mother, weeping for her lost status. My sister, terrified of a world she had never been taught to navigate. They looked small. They looked like strangers. "The check is paid," I said, gesturing to the receipt I had signed earlier. "Consider it my final contribution to the Holloway Family Fund. Do not contact me until the investigation is closed. If you try to come to my apartment or my office, I will file a restraining order." I turned away from the table. The silence behind me was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum where a family used to be. I looked down at the crumpled document lying amidst the wreckage of our dinner. It represented more than just a condo or a lien. It was a contract of servitude. For decades, my parents had operated on the assumption that my success was community property, a harvest to be reaped whenever they failed to plant their own seeds. They believed that blood was a binding legal agreement that superseded theft. "Let there be no ambiguity," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere of the restaurant. "I am not releasing the lien. I am not waiving my rights. And I am certainly not inheriting your debts." "Margaret," my mother wept, her face buried in a napkin that was now stained with mascara. "We are ruined. Do you hear me? Ruined. You were ruined the moment you thought you could outsmart a fraud detection system," I replied calmly. "I am simply the one who turned on the lights." I looked at Jessica. She was staring at her hands, her lower lip trembling. The reality was finally setting in. There would be no art studio. There would be no parent-funded apartment. The safety net she had bounced on for her entire adult life had just been cut. and she was staring down into the abyss of actual adulthood. "What am I going to do?" Jessica whispered, looking up at me with eyes that were terrified and young. I don't know how to do this alone." "Then you will learn," I said, not unkindly, but without a shred of pity. "Millions of people wake up every day, go to jobs they do not love, pay bills they struggle to afford, and survive without defrauding their relatives. You are going to join them. It is called life, Jessica. It is time you started living it." My father remained silent. He could not look at me. The shame radiating off him was palpable, a physical heat. He knew that if he spoke, he would only confirm his own defeat. He had lost his money, his reputation, and his scapegoat all in the span of 1 hour. I picked up my purse and slung the strap over my shoulder. The movement felt symbolic, like shrugging off a heavy winter coat I had been wearing for 30 years. "I am leaving now," I announced. "Do not follow me. Do not call me. If the police contact you regarding the fraud investigation, I suggest you get a lawyer. Do not list me as a character reference." I turned and walked away from the table. The walk to the exit felt incredibly long, yet with every step, I felt lighter. I could feel the eyes of the other patrons on me. They had seen the shouting, the tears, the shattered glass. To them, it looked like a tragedy. They saw a family falling apart. But as I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Obsidian and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air of the city, I did not feel tragic. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, listening to the rhythm of the traffic and the distant sound of the river against the pier. Inside that restaurant, 3 people were grappling with the consequences of their own greed. They were drowning in a mess of their own making. But out here, the air was clean. My credit was secure. My conscience was clear. I hailed a taxi, the yellow light beaming through the darkness. As I climbed into the back seat and gave the driver my address, I realized that I had lost a family, but I had finally regained myself. And looking back at the glowing windows of the restaurant, I knew it was a price I was more than willing to pay. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know where you are tuning in from, and if you think I made the right decision walking away from my family, please do not forget to subscribe to Victoria Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people.